My name is Georgia, and I am 32 years old. 2 weeks after my grandmother passed away, I walked into my childhood home and found my younger sister wearing a $60,000 vintage sapphire necklace that legally belonged to me. When I asked why Chloe was wearing my inheritance, my mother did not even look up from her tea. She waved her hand and said, "You never liked pretty things anyway, Georgia, and Chloe needs them for her brand." She thought she was just putting the reliable, invisible daughter back in her proper place. She did not realize I had my hand in my coat pocket, with my thumb resting on my phone screen, recording every single syllable. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled my family financial illusions, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Maya Tells Stories, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your age, your location, and the local time in the comments. I want to know who is sitting at the table with me right now. Now let me take you back to a Tuesday afternoon in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and the moment my mother confessed to a felony without realizing it. I work as a senior actuary in Jersey City. My daily professional life revolves around calculating risk, assessing probabilities, and mitigating disaster for corporate clients. I look at spreadsheets and predict exactly where the floor is going to cave in. In my family, I served the exact same function. I was the steady, predictable baseline. My younger sister Chloe was the volatile, celebrated asset. She operated a boutique event planning business in Hoboken, projecting an image of endless luxury on social media. My mother Linda funded and protected that image at all costs. My grandmother Sylvia possessed a sharp and unforgiving mind. She spent her final months in a hospice care facility, observing our family dynamics with brutal clarity. She watched Linda systematically catalog the items in her house, silently claiming heirlooms before the medical monitors even flatlined. 2 weeks after we buried Sylvia, my mother summoned Chloe and me to the family home in Cherry Hill for what she termed an informal estate distribution. I parked my car in the driveway and walked through the front door. The living room smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee. Chloe was already sitting on the velvet sofa. Resting against her collarbone, catching the afternoon light, was Sylvia's vintage Art Deco necklace. The piece was an intricate web of pristine diamonds surrounding a massive, unheated blue sapphire. I recognized it instantly. Sylvia had kept it locked in a heavy steel safe for 3 decades. I stopped in the center of the room. I looked at the heavy gems resting on my sister's skin. Then I looked at my mother sitting in an armchair with a ceramic mug. "Why is Chloe wearing Grandma's sapphire?" I asked. My voice remained level, carrying the flat cadence of a standard inquiry. Linda sighed heavily, acting as though my question was a tedious interruption to her day. She offered her rehearsed explanation without a trace of hesitation. "You never liked pretty things anyway, Georgia," she stated, taking a sip from her mug. "You sit in a cubicle all day. Chloe is building a lifestyle business. She meets with wealthy clients. She needs these statement pieces for her brand. Grandma would want her to have them." I did not scream. I did not argue or demand she take the necklace off. Crying over stolen property is an inefficient use of energy. I simply kept my right hand buried deep inside my wool coat pocket. My thumb found the smooth glass circle on my device screen. I pressed the stop button, ending the active voice recording. I had captured the theft in high-definition audio. I nodded once, maintaining a blank expression. I turned around and walked back out the front door, leaving them to their manufactured victory. I got into my vehicle and drove back toward my apartment in Jersey City. I connected my phone to the dashboard and uploaded the audio file to 2 separate encrypted corporate servers. Linda believed she could bypass the legal probate process by physically handing the valuables to her favorite child. She thought possession dictated ownership. But Sylvia and I had anticipated this exact scenario 6 months prior. We had executed a quiet clinical maneuver before her health failed. That necklace did not belong to the general estate. Linda had not merely played favorites, she had just provided me with a recorded confession to grand larceny, and the trap was already waiting for them to take the next step. My grandmother Sylvia possessed a sharp and unforgiving mind. She survived 3 decades of widowhood by managing her own financial portfolio with ruthless efficiency. She did not suffer fools, and she never allowed sentimentality to cloud her judgment. During her final 6 months, she resided in a private hospice care facility. The room smelled of medical-grade antiseptic and forced floral air fresheners. The steady mechanical hum of her oxygen concentrator provided a constant backing track to her remaining days. From her elevated bed, Sylvia observed the changing dynamics of her own family. She watched my mother Linda arrive for weekly visits, carrying a clipboard and a roll of colored dot stickers. Linda did not sit by the mattress holding her dying mother's hand. She walked through the adjacent rooms of Sylvia's house, systematically opening drawers and checking the undersides of antique furniture for manufacturing stamps. She was silently claiming heirlooms before the medical monitors even registered a flatline. Sylvia recognized the maneuver immediately. She knew her daughter better than anyone. Linda viewed the impending funeral not as a tragedy, but as a liquidation event. She intended to bypass the tedious legal probate process to secure the most valuable assets for her favorite child. Chloe required constant financial bailouts to maintain the illusion of her successful boutique event planning business in Hoboken. Linda treated Sylvia Legacy as a convenient slush fund designed specifically to sponsor Chloe and her fabricated lifestyle. Sylvia refused to let her lifetime of careful acquisitions dissolve into my sister's negligent hands. She summoned me to the hospice facility on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. She asked the attending nurse to close the heavy wooden door. She pointed a thin, pale finger toward the visitor chair and instructed me to sit. "Georgia," she said, her voice raspy but entirely coherent, "your mother is currently measuring the dining room table for her own house. When I am gone, she will attempt to empty the wall safe. She will take the Art Deco sapphire and the diamond tennis earrings, and she will hand them directly to your sister. We are going to prevent that from happening." As a senior actuary, I calculate risk variables for a living. I look at potential points of failure and design structural fortresses to withstand the impact. When a family member demonstrates a high probability of predatory behavior, you do not rely on the honor system. You do not simply draft a standard last will and testament. A standard will is merely a set of instructions left for an executor. If the designated executor is corrupt, they can easily ignore the instructions, hide physical assets, and claim the items were lost. We needed a mechanism that removed the assets from the estate entirely before the reading of the will ever occurred. Sylvia and I spent the next 3 weeks executing a quiet, clinical, legal maneuver. We hired an independent wealth management attorney named David Caldwell. He visited the hospice facility carrying a briefcase full of specialized documentation. We did not alert Linda or Chloe to his presence. Under Caldwell guidance, we established an irrevocable blind trust. In legal terminology, an irrevocable trust is a separate corporate entity. Once an asset is transferred into this structure, the original owner relinquishes their personal rights to the property. The trust itself becomes the legal owner. We generated a comprehensive, itemized schedule of the entire vintage jewelry collection. The schedule included the $60,000 sapphire necklace, the platinum bracelets, and a dozen other high-value pieces. Sylvia signed the transfer forms in blue ink. With those signatures, the jewelry collection ceased to be her personal property. We named me as the sole acting trustee and the primary beneficiary of the corporate entity. We left the physical items resting inside the heavy steel safe in Sylvia's master bedroom. Leaving the tangible assets in their original location ensured Linda suspected nothing. She continued to visit the house, placing her little colored dot stickers on the furniture, assuming she held the master key to the kingdom. She did not realize the pieces she coveted were already legally severed from the estate. Fast forward 6 months to the present day. I drove my sedan back to my apartment in Jersey City after the informal estate distribution in Cherry Hill. The tires hummed a steady rhythm against the pavement of the New Jersey Turnpike. I kept my phone connected to the dashboard interface. The audio file of my mother admitting she gave the sapphire necklace to Chloe finished uploading to my primary encrypted server. I initiated a secondary backup to an offshore cloud storage account. Redundancy is the cornerstone of data security. I played the conversation back in my mind. You never liked pretty things anyway, Georgia. Chloe needs them for her brand. Linda thought she was merely executing a motherly prerogative. She assumed she was bending the rules of family etiquette to favor the golden child. She lacked the basic financial literacy required to understand the magnitude of her action. Because the jewelry belonged to an independent corporate trust, the legal definition of her behavior shifted dramatically. By opening the wall safe, removing the vintage sapphire necklace, and physically handing it to Chloe without executing a formal probate inventory, Linda had crossed a severe boundary. She had not just played favorites, she had stolen assets from a corporate entity. The value of the stolen property far exceeded the state threshold for a minor misdemeanor. My mother had just committed grand larceny. She provided me with a high-definition audio confession of the crime. She stated her motive clearly and confirmed the current physical location of the stolen goods. The trap Sylvia and I built in that sterile hospice room was now fully armed, and Linda had stepped directly onto the pressure plate. I navigated through the dense evening traffic of Jersey City and pulled into my designated parking garage. I turned off the ignition and sat in the quiet cabin of my vehicle. The initial phase of the operation was successful, but an actuary never relies on a single data point. People who commit brazen theft rarely limit their exposure to just one crime. If Linda felt comfortable bypassing the legal probate process to hand Chloe a $60,000 necklace, she still faced a significant logistical problem. The jewelry collection was a known quantity. The pieces were listed on Sylvia's primary homeowner insurance policy. Eventually, the official estate attorney would request an accounting of those specific insured assets. Linda could not simply tell the probate court that she gave the items away. She needed a cover story to explain the missing inventory. A cold realization settled over me. People who steal from their own families usually attempt to extract maximum value from every possible angle. If Linda wanted to protect Chloe from returning the necklace, she had to fabricate a scenario where the jewelry vanished before Sylvia even passed away. She needed an external scapegoat. I unlocked my apartment door, dropped my keys on the counter, and walked straight to my home office. I opened my laptop and booted up my secure browser. As the sole trustee of the Blind Trust, I maintained the primary contact authorization for the high-value item insurance policy protecting the jewelry. I needed to log into the carrier portal immediately. I needed to see exactly how my mother planned to balance her crooked ledger. And I suspected I was about to find a second felony waiting for me in the digital paperwork. An actuary is trained to never rely on a single isolated data point. We do not observe a localized failure and assume the rest of the structure is secure. We follow the fracture lines. When I returned to my Jersey City apartment on a Tuesday morning, the air carried the crisp, metallic chill of early November. My living room was sparsely furnished, containing only a desk, an ergonomic chair, and a high-resolution dual-monitor setup. I thrive in this environment. It is a space designed for clarity and calculated precision. The chaos of my childhood had conditioned me to build fortresses out of logic. My mother, Linda, operated on a completely different frequency. She lived her entire life reacting to the immediate emotional demands of her favorite child. She viewed rules and regulations as bureaucratic obstacles designed to punish her for being exceptional. If a parking meter expired, she argued with the attendant, claiming she was a victim of circumstance. She routinely manipulated small realities to benefit Chloe. She covered up failing grades in high school by blaming incompetent teachers. She subsidized a failing event planning business by siphoning equity from her own home. She possessed a terrifying capacity for spontaneous fiction. But fabricating a narrative to a high school principal is fundamentally different from manipulating the financial assets of a deceased relative. The stakes transition from petty social maneuvering to federal jurisdiction. I needed to map the complete perimeter of her current operation. I needed to understand exactly how she planned to conceal the theft of a $60,000 vintage sapphire necklace from the official probate inventory. Because Sylvia and I had established the irrevocable blind trust prior to her passing, I held a specific set of administrative keys. High-value vintage jewelry requires meticulous documentation. The trust mandated annual independent appraisals to maintain accurate replacement value coverage. Consequently, I was listed as the primary authorized contact for the specialized insurance policy covering the collection. My mother assumed the jewelry was simply lumped into the general homeowner coverage of the Cherry Hill property. She did not know a separate corporate rider existed. Her ignorance was about to become the most valuable weapon in my arsenal. I sat down at my desk and opened a secure, encrypted browser window. I navigated to the portal of the national insurance carrier. I typed in my credentials, cleared the two-factor authentication protocol, and accessed the primary dashboard for Sylvia policies. The system loaded. I expected to see a standard interface listing the scheduled items and their corresponding premium amounts. Instead, the screen illuminated with a glaring crimson banner stretching across the top of the interface. The red flag indicated an active, severe status update. An automated system message hovered beneath the banner. It read, "Pending claim investigation, currently assigned to the Fraud Prevention Unit." I stared at the monitor for a long moment. I did not move. The rhythmic hum of my computer cooling fan filled the silence of the room. The initial shock gave way to the cold, mechanical processing of an auditor. The pieces were locking into place. I clicked on the claim number hyperlinked in the notification. The detailed summary of the incident report populated the screen. Exactly 3 days after Sylvia's funeral, Linda had contacted the insurance carrier via telephone. She had initiated a massive, comprehensive claim against the general homeowner policy attached to the Cherry Hill residence. I read the narrative summary she had provided to the claims adjuster. It was a masterpiece of manufactured tragedy. Linda reported the entire vintage jewelry collection, including the Art Deco sapphire necklace and the diamond tennis earrings, as missing. She claimed she discovered the heavy steel wall safe empty while sorting through Sylvia's personal effects. She did not stop at simply reporting the items as lost. To expedite a payout, an insurance claim requires a plausible explanation of the loss. Linda provided one. She explicitly blamed the theft on the medical personnel. She stated on the recorded line with the insurance agent that the pieces were most likely stolen by the rotating staff of hospice nurses who had unrestricted access to the master bedroom during Sylvia's final weeks of life. She had effectively accused a group of underpaid, exhausted healthcare workers of grand larceny to cover her own tracks. The staggering, unmitigated arrogance of the maneuver was breathtaking. Linda was actively attempting to double-dip the financial system. She had already walked into the master bedroom, opened the safe, and physically handed the most valuable assets directly to Chloe. She watched her favorite daughter wear the $60,000 sapphire necklace during the informal estate distribution in her own living room. She then turned around and filed a sworn affidavit with a national insurance conglomerate claiming those exact same items were stolen by anonymous nurses. She intended to let Chloe keep the physical jewelry to wear and eventually sell, while she simultaneously attempted to extract a 6-figure cash payout from the insurance company to line her own pockets. She thought she was executing a brilliant, victimless crime. She assumed the insurance company would simply write a check to the grieving daughter and close the file. She believed she had outsmarted the probate court, the insurance carrier, and her quiet, invisible older daughter. She was profoundly mistaken on every single front. In the state of New Jersey, filing a false insurance claim exceeding $75,000 is classified as a second-degree felony. It carries a presumption of incarceration upon conviction. Submitting a sworn statement accusing innocent third parties of theft elevates the severity of the offense. My mother had just escalated her situation from a simple probate dispute into a major criminal enterprise. I placed both hands flat on the surface of my desk. I did not feel a sudden surge of vindictive joy. I felt the specific gravitational pull of inevitable consequences. I had spent my entire life watching Linda shield Chloe from accountability. She paid off her credit card debts, lied to her landlords, and funded her fabricated influencer lifestyle. Now Linda was literally risking a federal prison sentence to maintain the illusion of Chloe's success. I reached for my mouse and began the extraction process. I clicked the download icon on the incident report. I secured the PDF file containing her official statement to the claims adjuster. I downloaded the itemized list of the allegedly stolen jewelry she submitted for reimbursement. I utilized a specialized software program to capture the IP access logs from the carrier portal, verifying exactly when and from what location the claim was initiated. The IP address matched the residential router at the Cherry Hill house. I created a new encrypted folder on my hard drive labeled Cherry Hill Recovery. I deposited the freshly downloaded insurance documents into the folder. They sat adjacent to the high-definition audio file I had recorded 2 days prior. The audio file, where Linda explicitly stated she gave the sapphire necklace to Chloe because she needed it for her brand. I had the audio recording of her confessing to the physical transfer of the asset. I now had the sworn insurance affidavit where she claimed the exact same asset was stolen by hospice workers. It was a perfect, airtight contradiction. The two pieces of evidence combined to form an inescapable trap of perjury and felony fraud. But an actuary does not simply present evidence and walk away. We analyze the root cause of the behavior. We determine why a system failed so spectacularly. I needed to understand the driving force behind Linda's sudden, desperate escalation into serious criminal activity. Why was she suddenly willing to risk a 6-figure insurance fraud charge mere days after her mother's funeral? The answer did not lie with Linda. The answer lay with the intended recipient of the stolen goods. The sapphire necklace was not just a shiny accessory to complement a cocktail dress. It was a highly liquid, easily transportable asset worth a significant amount of capital. Chloe was not known for her sentimental attachment to family history. She was known for projecting a lifestyle of immense wealth on social media while secretly drowning in liabilities. If Linda was willing to commit a felony to secure that necklace for her favorite child, it meant the child was in immediate, severe financial jeopardy. I needed to audit Chloe reality. I needed to see exactly how close the golden child was to complete structural collapse. I minimized the insurance portal and opened a new tab connecting to the state public records database. I was about to look behind the curtain of a failing boutique business, and I knew the ledger was going to be covered in red ink. To understand the anatomy of a crime, you must first isolate the underlying motive. My mother was not a sophisticated criminal mastermind. She was a highly reactive mechanism programmed to shield my younger sister from the natural consequences of her own actions. I minimized the insurance carrier portal on my monitor and opened a new secure browser tab. I navigated to the New Jersey State Civil Court database. I needed to translate my sister into raw data to see the exact shape of the disaster Linda was trying to cover up. Chloe operated a boutique event planning agency out of a leased commercial space in Hoboken. If you viewed her life exclusively through the lens of her social media presence, you would assume she was a highly successful entrepreneur. Her digital feeds were a masterclass in manufactured prosperity. She posted daily images holding crystal champagne flutes in vaulted hotel ballrooms. She wore designer garments and tagged exclusive vendor locations across the tri-state area. She sold the illusion of limitless luxury to insecure brides willing to pay a premium for her perceived status. Growing up, Chloe learned early that projecting success was far more valuable in our household than actually achieving it. Linda praised her aesthetic choices while intentionally ignoring her failing academic report cards. Our mother trained her to believe that presentation was the only metric that mattered in society. I took the opposite approach. I studied mathematics and actuarial science because numbers do not care about your outfit. A ledger does not lie to make you feel better about your choices. Chloe believed her own marketing, but a public court docket operates on facts. I entered the legal name of her limited liability company into the search field. The system processed the request and generated a list of active legal filings. The results populated my screen like a terminal diagnosis. Her corporate facade was a sinking ship, taking on water much faster than she could bail it out. The very first document I opened was a formal judgment lien. Chloe had defaulted on a $90,000 commercial line of credit. The regional banking institution had issued the final demand notice 6 weeks prior. In the financial sector, a default of that magnitude on an unsecured business line triggers a catastrophic chain reaction. It freezes all operating capital and destroys the entity credit rating overnight. I scrolled further down the digital docket. Her supply chain was actively closing in on her. A premium floral distributor based in Manhattan had filed a civil suit for $14,000 in unpaid invoices. A specialty catering firm lodged a formal complaint for breach of contract regarding a massive spring wedding she had mismanaged and failed to fund. These were not minor administrative disputes. They were the desperate actions of small business vendors who realized they were never going to get paid. Chloe was taking deposits from new clients to pay off old debts, operating a miniature Ponzi scheme disguised as an event planning firm. The fatal blow sat at the very bottom of the public record queue. Her commercial landlord in Hoboken had filed a preliminary notice of commercial eviction. She was 3 months behind on her lease payments. Under state commercial tenancy laws, a landlord can lock the doors and seize the internal assets if the occupant fails to cure the default within the specified window. Chloe was mere days away from arriving at her boutique and finding a heavy steel padlock securing the front entrance. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a cold, resounding click. When I walked into the Cherry Hill living room 2 weeks after the funeral and saw the vintage sapphire necklace resting against her skin, I assumed she was just indulging her usual vanity. I thought she was simply wearing it to assert dominance and claim her status as the favorite child. I was wrong. The necklace was not a sentimental keepsake to remember our grandmother by. It was an emergency liquid asset. It was a high-stakes bailout designed to rescue the golden child from her own spectacular incompetence. Linda knew about the impending bankruptcy. That explains why she paced the halls of the hospice facility, placing colored inventory stickers on antique furniture, while Sylvia drew her final breaths. My mother was taking inventory of the available capital. She viewed her own mother legacy as a convenient pawnshop catalog. She stole my legal inheritance to cover Chloe debts because forcing her favorite daughter to face the reality of a failed business was a concept Linda could not tolerate. In my mother-distorted logic, my stability was a weapon she could use against me. Because I earned a senior actuary salary and lived within my means, Linda convinced herself that I did not need the jewelry. She labeled my inheritance as surplus capital and unilaterally decided to reallocate it to the child who was drowning. She justified felony theft by calling it family support. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and processed the timeline. Linda handed the physical assets to Chloe. Then Linda filed a false insurance claim reporting the items stolen by hospice nurses, hoping to extract a secondary cash payout to cover her own declining retirement funds. They were trying to extract maximum capital from a dead woman estate before the probate court even opened its doors. But stealing a high-value physical asset is only the first step of the crime. The true difficulty lies in the liquidation process. Sylvia Art Deco necklace was not a generic piece of jewelry you could sell at a neighborhood strip mall exchange. It was a museum-quality Cartier piece featuring a massive, unheated blue sapphire surrounded by pristine diamonds. It carried an appraised replacement value exceeding $60,000. If Chloe attempted to fence that specific item at a standard pawn shop, the dealer would offer her pennies on the dollar to mitigate their own risk. A $5,000 cash offer from a shady buyer would not put a dent in her $90,000 defaulted credit line or stop her commercial eviction. To extract the actual monetary value required to save her sinking business, Chloe had to seek out a premium buyer. She needed to convert the stolen physical asset into untraceable cash at a value close to its official appraisal. That specific requirement dictated her next move with mathematical certainty. She could not sell it quietly. She had to step into a highly regulated market. She would need to approach a legitimate gemologist, a high-end vintage dealer, or an elite estate auction house. The secondary market for premium vintage jewelry is deliberately structured to prevent the anonymous liquidation of stolen goods. Legitimate auction houses require established provenance. They demand identification from the seller. Most importantly, they run the serial numbers and manufacturer hallmarks through international registry databases to ensure they are not handling illicit merchandise. When Sylvia and I established the irrevocable blind trust 6 months prior, we did not merely sign transfer documents. As the acting trustee, I had taken the additional precaution of registering the entire collection with a global specialized jewelry database. I flagged the items as belonging to a corporate entity and set up automated alerts tied to my primary email address. Chloe was currently walking around with a $60,000 anchor tied to her neck. She was desperate for cash and rapidly running out of time before her landlord locked her doors. She was going to walk into a pristine, brightly lit showroom in a major city and place my property on a velvet tray. She thought she was liquidating a family heirloom to save her brand. She did not realize she was carrying a tracked asset directly into an invisible security net. I closed the Public Records tab on my monitor. I did not need to hunt her down. I just had to sit at my desk and wait for the digital alarms to sound. The problem with stealing high-end vintage jewelry is the liquidation process. You cannot quietly fence a museum-quality piece at a generic suburban pawn shop without raising immediate red flags. A pawnbroker dealing in electronics and scrap gold will not offer $60,000 in cash for a pristine Cartier Art Deco sapphire necklace. They lack the specialized clientele to resell the item, and they operate under strict municipal reporting requirements designed to catch petty thieves. They would offer pennies on the dollar and flag the transaction to the local police precinct. Chloe was desperate, but she was not stupid about aesthetics. She operated a boutique event planning business in Hoboken. She spent her entire professional life networking within affluent social circles, curating expensive floral arrangements and booking luxury venues. She understood the inherent value of premium brands, and she knew exactly where wealthy buyers congregated. To extract the massive sum of capital required to satisfy her $90,000 commercial credit default and halt her impending eviction, she needed a legitimate avenue. She required a certified independent gemologist and access to an elite international market. 2 weeks after the informal estate distribution in Cherry Hill, my mobile phone illuminated on my desk. I was currently reviewing a complex risk assessment matrix for a corporate client in Jersey City. The incoming notification was not a text message or a social media update. It was a high-priority automated email alert from the Global Jewelry Registry database I had securely linked to the irrevocable blind trust 6 months prior. I picked up the device and opened the encrypted communication. The digital alert contained a stark, definitive notification of a database inquiry. An independent gemologist operating out of a prestigious historic auction house located in Midtown Manhattan had just executed a formal serial number search. The specific item queried was a vintage platinum necklace featuring an unheated blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. The manufacturer hallmark and the exact carat weight matched Sylvia Cartier piece flawlessly. The trap Sylvia and I constructed in her hospice room had successfully engaged its primary sensor. Chloe had crossed the Hudson River. She had walked through the polished brass doors of a legendary auction house, carrying my stolen inheritance inside her designer handbag. I pictured her sitting in a quiet, private consultation room, attempting to charm the intake specialist. She likely presented herself as the grieving granddaughter, tasked with liquidating a beloved family heirloom to cover end-of-life expenses. She assumed her polished influencer facade would easily bypass their security protocols. She believed the auction house would eagerly accept the consignment, offer her a substantial cash advance against the projected sale price, and list the necklace in their upcoming winter estate catalog. She did not comprehend the rigorous compliance standards governing the secondary market for fine jewelry. When an individual attempts to consign a piece of that magnitude, the auction house does not merely assess the clarity of the stones. They immediately verify the provenance to ensure they are not handling illicit merchandise. The gemologist logged into the International Registry database to confirm the item history and inadvertently tripped the invisible digital tripwire I had installed. I did not experience a surge of vindictive adrenaline. I felt the cold, mechanical satisfaction of a completed equation. My mother and my sister had operated for decades under the assumption that their actions carried zero permanent consequences. They assumed I would always remain the silent, compliant workhorse, absorbing their financial disasters. They underestimated my capacity for systemic retaliation. I did not draft an angry text message to Chloe demanding the immediate return of my property. I did not call Linda to threaten her with police intervention. Contacting the perpetrators directly while they are actively committing the crime is a tactical error. It provides them with an opportunity to panic, retrieve the asset, and hide it in an untraceable location. I needed the jewelry to remain exactly where it was. I placed my mobile phone face down on my desk. I opened a secure browser window on my primary monitor and searched the corporate directory for the Manhattan auction house. I located the direct contact information for their internal legal department. I dialed the number using my office landline, bypassing the general reception desk entirely. A woman answered on the second ring, identifying herself as the Senior Director of Compliance. Her tone was brisk and guarded, the typical posture of an executive accustomed to handling high-stakes disputes. "Good morning." I began, my voice carrying the flat, authoritative cadence of a professional actuary. "My name is Georgia. I am the sole legal trustee of an irrevocable blind trust. Approximately 20 minutes ago, an independent gemologist at your facility initiated a database inquiry regarding a vintage Cartier Sapphire necklace." The line went silent for a fraction of a second. I heard the faint click of a keyboard as she rapidly checked her internal system logs. "I see the inquiry in our active intake queue, Ms. Georgia," she replied, her tone shifting from guarded to highly attentive. "How can I assist you regarding this item?" "The individual currently sitting in your consultation room attempting to consign that specific piece of jewelry is my younger sister, Chloe," I stated clearly. "She does not possess the legal authority to liquidate that asset. The necklace does not belong to her, and it does not belong to the general estate of our late grandmother. The item was legally transferred into a corporate trust 6 months ago. The physical asset was removed from a residential safe in New Jersey without authorization. I am formally notifying your institution that you are currently handling stolen property subject to an active probate dispute and grand larceny." The compliance director did not argue or request clarification. In the world of high-end auctions, the phrase stolen property triggers an immediate automated response protocol. The liability risks associated with fencing illicit goods are catastrophic for a prestigious brand. "Please hold the line," she instructed smoothly. "I am initiating a security hold on the intake room right now. Can you provide documentary proof of ownership to support this claim?" "I have the certified irrevocable trust documents, the itemized schedule of assets, and the registered serial numbers ready for immediate transmission," I confirmed. "I am sending the encrypted PDF files to your direct email address as we speak." I clicked send on my computer. The progress bar filled rapidly, and the transmission confirmed. "I have received the files," the director stated a moment later. "I am reviewing the trust schedule now. The manufacturer hallmark and the carat weights match the item currently sitting on our intake tray. We are halting the consignment process immediately. The item will not be returned to the individual who brought it into the facility." She outlined the standard operating procedure for disputed high-value assets. Under international protocols, the auction house is legally obligated to impound the jewelry when a credible claim of theft is supported by certified documentation. They secure the item in a maximum security vault and refuse to release it until a judge issues a formal court order determining the rightful owner. "Thank you for your prompt action," I replied. "My legal counsel will be in contact with your department shortly to facilitate the recovery process." I hung up the phone. The physical asset was officially neutralized. Chloe walked into that building expecting to walk out with a lucrative cash advance to save her failing business. Instead, she was about to be escorted into a private security office by armed guards and informed that her grandmother necklace was seized as stolen property. She was going to leave the facility empty-handed, facing the total collapse of her boutique agency and a potential criminal investigation. The trap had successfully snapped shut around her ankle. The financial lifeline Linda had stolen on her behalf was severed. But I knew the situation was far from over. The immediate loss of the consignment cash would trigger a massive, erratic panic response. Chloe would inevitably call our mother, sparking a frantic chain reaction of denial and manipulation. They would assume this was a mere administrative error they could bully me into fixing. They were completely unaware that the auction house seizure was just the opening salvo in a much larger war. They still believed they held the superior position in the family hierarchy. They were about to invite me to a holiday gathering, expecting me to quietly surrender my legal rights over a plate of roasted turkey. I folded my hands on my desk and waited for the holiday invitations to arrive. The fundamental weakness of an arrogant mind is the assumption that everyone else is operating on a lower intellectual frequency. My mother built her entire worldview around this specific vulnerability. Because she consistently manipulated social situations to favor Chloe, she genuinely believed she could outmaneuver the legal and financial systems governing actual capital. She spent decades treating me as the quiet, reliable workhorse who would blindly absorb the consequences of her blatant favoritism. Ignorant of the invisible walls rapidly closing around them, Linda hosted the annual Thanksgiving dinner at the family home in Cherry Hill. She did not treat the holiday as a somber gathering marking the first major event since Sylvia's passing. She treated the dining room table as a victory lap. The house smelled of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and unearned triumph. I arrived precisely at 4 o'clock. I parked my sedan in the driveway and walked up the familiar concrete steps. I wore a tailored wool sweater and dark trousers projecting the standard professional neutrality I maintained in corporate boardrooms. I did not bring a bottle of wine or a pretense of familial warmth. I brought my mobile phone with the voice recording application silently engaged in my right coat pocket. The interior of the house was a curated display of suburban prosperity. Linda had set the long mahogany table with her expensive imported china and polished crystal goblets. She glided between the kitchen and the dining area wearing a forced, melodic smile, offering superficial platitudes to our extended relatives. Chloe sat near the center of the table, occupying the position of honor. She wore a pristine silk blouse and drank champagne with a careless, practiced elegance. Resting against her earlobes, catching the ambient light of the chandelier, were Sylvia vintage diamond tennis earrings. The brilliant cut stones flashed a cold, hard reflection across the room. They were part of the irrevocable blind trust. They legally belonged to the corporate entity I controlled. Yet Chloe wore them like casual accessories acquired at a neighborhood boutique. Throughout the main course, Chloe dominated the conversation. She spoke loudly, ensuring every aunt and cousin in attendance heard her manufactured narrative. She boasted about an upcoming massive capital injection that would supposedly expand her event planning business in Hoboken. She painted a picture of a booming enterprise, securing lucrative new contracts across the tri-state area. She did not mention the $90,000 defaulted commercial line of credit. She omitted the $14,000 civil suit filed by the Manhattan floral distributor. She certainly did not disclose the preliminary notice of commercial eviction hanging over her leased office space. She was actively constructing a fictional empire while wearing stolen collateral to fund the illusion. I chewed my roasted vegetables methodically. I listened to the specific phrasing she used to describe her impending financial rescue. The capital injection she referenced was the anticipated cash advance from the Manhattan auction house. She believed the $60,000 sapphire necklace she had dropped off 2 days prior was currently being processed for consignment. She thought the auction house was drafting a generous check to save her sinking ship. She had absolutely no idea that her grandmother necklace was presently locked inside a maximum security vault seized under international stolen property protocols. The meal transitioned into the dessert course. Linda poured coffee and sliced a pumpkin pie. The ambient chatter of the extended family provided a convenient layer of acoustic cover. My mother walked around the perimeter of the table and stopped directly behind my chair. She leaned down, placing one hand on my shoulder. The physical contact felt heavy and deeply insincere. "Georgia," she said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial whisper meant only for me, "I need you to review some standard administrative paperwork before you leave tonight." She walked over to a nearby sideboard and retrieved a thick, yellow manila envelope. She returned to the table and slid the package smoothly across the linen tablecloth until it stopped directly in front of my plate. "It is just a routine probate waiver," she explained, casually waving her hand as if dismissing a trivial detail. "The estate attorney drafted it last week. I need you to sign it, waiving your right to demand an independent physical inventory of Sylvia assets. It will save the family thousands of dollars in unnecessary legal fees and expedite the closure of the estate." I looked down at the printed document protruding from the unsealed flap. I did not reach for a pen. I recognized the specific legal maneuver she was attempting to execute. In the state of New Jersey, a probate waiver is a powerful binding mechanism. When an heir signs that specific document, they formally surrender their right to contest the actions of the designated executor. They legally agree to accept the distribution of assets without requiring a certified third party to verify the contents of the estate. Linda was not trying to save the family money on administrative fees. She was trying to legally sanitize a felony. She needed my signature on that waiver to close a massive vulnerability in her timeline. She had already physically handed the $60,000 sapphire necklace and the diamond earrings to Chloe without logging them into the official probate inventory. She had simultaneously filed a massive false insurance claim on her homeowner policy, reporting the exact same items as stolen by hospice nurses to extract a six-figure cash payout for her own retirement fund. If the estate attorney or the probate court mandated an independent physical audit of Sylvia's possessions, they would immediately discover the high-value jewelry was missing. If I signed the waiver, Linda could simply tell the probate judge that all the heirs were satisfied with the current distribution and bypass the audit entirely. My signature was the final piece of the puzzle required to execute her double-dipping strategy flawlessly. She was asking the quiet, reliable daughter to blindly underwrite a massive insurance fraud and grand larceny operation. I set my dessert fork down on the edge of my porcelain plate. I looked across the table at the diamond earrings glittering brightly on my sister ears. The stones caught the light of the chandelier, throwing a sharp reflection directly into my eyes. Chloe took another sip of champagne, completely oblivious to the legal gravity of the document resting inches from my hand. I placed my fingers lightly on the surface of the manila envelope. I did not pick it up. I applied a firm, steady pressure and slid the package slowly back across the tablecloth until it stopped directly in front of my mother. "I prefer to let the estate attorney handle the full inventory process, Mom," I stated. My voice was calm, carrying the flat, clinical cadence of a courtroom deposition. It is the responsible thing to do when dealing with high-value assets. We must ensure everything is properly accounted for before closing Sylvia accounts. The surrounding noise of the Thanksgiving dinner seemed to evaporate instantly. The specific denial of her request shattered the curated atmosphere of suburban triumph. Linda's smile did not merely fade. It tightened into a rigid, hostile line. The muscles around her jaw locked. Her eyes narrowed, assessing the sudden, unexpected resistance. She had spent 2 decades issuing commands and watching me silently comply to maintain the peace. She was entirely unaccustomed to encountering a structural boundary she could not manipulate or bypass with a forced smile. She stared at the returned envelope, attempting to calculate a new angle of coercion. She opened her mouth to deliver a sharp reprimand, likely involving my lack of familial loyalty or my failure to support my sibling during a difficult transition period. She did not realize the device in my coat pocket was currently recording the entire exchange. She was unaware that her aggressive push to secure a probate waiver was now documented audio evidence of an active cover-up. She thought she was punishing an insubordinate daughter over a piece of administrative paperwork. She did not comprehend that her desperate demand was the final nail in the coffin of her fraudulent insurance claim. The Thanksgiving dinner concluded in a tense, fragile silence. I retrieved my coat from the hallway closet, said a polite goodbye to my extended relatives, and walked out the front door. The crisp evening air felt remarkably clean. I got into my sedan and drove away from Cherry Hill, leaving them to their false sense of security. The holiday trap had successfully captured the necessary data points, but I knew the quiet tension in the dining room was merely the calm before a spectacular storm. The upcoming Monday would bring the devastating reality check they had spent their entire lives avoiding. The Manhattan auction house was preparing to deliver a catastrophic blow to Chloe's fictional empire, and I needed to be fully prepared for the erratic, frantic fallout. The structure of a carefully engineered trap relies on the predictable behavior of the target. When you understand the psychological imperatives driving an individual, you do not need to chase them. You simply place the bait in the exact location their desperation requires them to be. The following Monday morning, the mechanism I had silently constructed in Manhattan activated with absolute precision. My sister Chloe operated her boutique event planning business under a suffocating layer of immediate debt. She possessed a $90,000 defaulted commercial line of credit and faced an impending eviction notice from her Hoboken landlord. She needed liquid capital instantly to halt the total collapse of her fabricated influencer lifestyle. She woke up that Monday fully expecting to solve her massive structural failures with a single lucrative transaction. She took a morning train across the Hudson River and walked through the polished brass doors of the prestigious Manhattan auction house. She carried herself with the rehearsed confidence of a wealthy socialite accustomed to VIP treatment. She approached the intake desk, expecting the independent gemologist to hand her a thick envelope containing a substantial cash advance against the projected winter estate sale of Sylvia Vintage Cartier Sapphire necklace. She believed the appraisal process was a mere formality, and her grandmother legacy was the key to securing her continued relevance. The reality waiting for her inside that building was entirely different. She was not greeted by a smiling intake specialist offering her a crystal flute of sparkling water. She was met by the senior director of compliance, accompanied by two men wearing dark, unassuming suits. They did not guide her to a plush velvet sofa in a private viewing room. They escorted her down a quiet corridor and directed her into a stark, windowless security office. The compliance director did not offer pleasantries. In the high-stakes environment of international art and jewelry auctions, the discovery of illicit merchandise triggers a severe and immediate protocol. The auction house informed Chloe that the $60,000 sapphire necklace she had submitted for consignment was officially flagged in a global registry database. They notified her that the physical asset was formally seized under international stolen property mandates. The item was currently impounded inside a maximum security vault located deep within the facility. They explained in clear, uncompromising legal terms that the necklace was the subject of an active probate dispute and an ongoing investigation into grand larceny. They stated unequivocally that returning the jewelry to her possession was impossible without a certified court order signed by a judge determining the rightful owner. Chloe did not possess the emotional resilience or the factual leverage to mount a defense. She could not produce a valid bill of sale or a legal document proving her ownership because neither existed. She was suddenly stripped of her arrogance and confronted with the terrifying prospect of a criminal investigation. She panicked. She did not ask clarifying questions or demand to speak with her legal counsel. She grabbed her designer handbag, bolted from the security office, and fled the building entirely. The loss of the consignment advance was a catastrophic blow to her immediate survival strategy, but the implication of the seizure was far worse. The auction house had effectively frozen her only available lifeline, while simultaneously placing her at the center of a federal theft inquiry. When a parasite loses its primary food source, it immediately attacks the nearest available host. Chloe stumbled onto the busy Manhattan sidewalk and initiated a frantic chain reaction. She pulled out her mobile phone and called the only person who had spent 2 decades shielding her from the consequences of her own actions. She called Linda. My mother received the frantic transmission at the Cherry Hill residence. She listened to her golden child sobbing hysterically about armed guards and seized assets. Linda had spent her entire adult life treating reality as a flexible narrative she could bend to her will. If a teacher failed Chloe, she accused the school of bias. If a vendor sued Chloe, she blamed the economy. But you cannot charm or bully a compliance director. If a vendor sued Chloe, she blamed the economy. But you cannot charm or bully a compliance director at a legendary auction house holding a flagged asset. Linda required a tactical solution, and she reflexively turned to the one person she had trained to solve her logistical nightmares. My mobile phone began vibrating on my desk in Jersey City shortly after 10 o'clock. I was in the middle of reviewing a complex risk mitigation matrix for a corporate client. I glanced at the caller ID. It displayed my mother name. I did not answer. In forensic investigations, you let the subject build a comprehensive record of their panic before you engage. A missed call is a neutral data point, but a rapid succession of unanswered attempts indicates a severe loss of control. The device lit up 11 more times over the span of 2 hours. Each subsequent notification was accompanied by a frantic, urgent voicemail. I finally pressed the green accept icon on the 13th attempt. I engaged the call recording feature on my device with a subtle tap of my thumb. "Hello, Mom," I said, my voice carrying the flat, even cadence of a standard weekday greeting. "Georgia." Linda gasped, her voice breathless and saturated with a thick layer of artificial indignation. "Thank God you finally picked up your phone. I need you to drop whatever you are doing immediately. We have a massive crisis." She did not ask if I was busy with a client. She did not inquire about my well-being. She launched directly into a chaotic, breathless monologue demanding my immediate compliance. "Chloe is having a complete breakdown," she continued, rapidly, her tone rising in pitch. "She went to an auction house in the city this morning to get an appraisal on Sylvia, old Sapphire necklace. Some incompetent clerk in their intake department completely botched the paperwork. They told her the item was flagged in some ridiculous database, and they actually confiscated it. They refused to give it back to her." She paused to draw a ragged breath, attempting to project a sense of righteous maternal fury. "It is an absolute outrage, Georgia," she stated emphatically. "They basically stole her property right out of her hands. I need you to use your corporate contacts and untangle this massive misunderstanding right now. You deal with contracts and lawyers all day long. Call their legal department, threaten them with a massive lawsuit, and force them to release that necklace back to your sister today. She needs that capital for her business by Friday." I sat quietly in my ergonomic chair and listened to her construct a spectacular fiction. Linda was actively attempting to weaponize my professional competence to facilitate the return of stolen goods. She genuinely believed I was the obedient, gullible workhorse who would blindly execute her commands without verifying the underlying math. She assumed I would draft a threatening legal letter to the auction house based entirely on her hysterical version of events. She had absolutely no idea that I was the exact individual who had placed the phone call to the senior director of compliance. She did not know I had securely transmitted the irrevocable blind trust documents and the certified serial numbers that triggered the seizure. She thought she was deploying her reliable fixer to solve a clerical error. I let the silence stretch across the cellular connection for a long moment. I needed her to explicitly confirm her knowledge of the asset's current location and her understanding of its intended purpose. Why would I call an auction house to demand the return of a necklace that legally belongs to the estate? "Mom," I asked, maintaining a tone of mild administrative curiosity, "the probate inventory has not even commenced yet. The jewelry should still be sitting inside the wall safe at the Cherry Hill house." The question hit the line like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. Linda realized she had just admitted to the unauthorized removal of a high-value asset before the estate was legally settled. She had to instantly fabricate a justification for her actions to maintain the illusion of her own innocence. She was about to invent a spontaneous lie to cover a felony, and I knew that lie would directly contradict the sworn insurance affidavit she had already filed. The trap was fully armed, and she was stepping directly onto the trigger. I leaned slightly closer to the microphone on my desk, preparing to capture the exact phrase that would dismantle her entire defense strategy, that would inevitably follow the seizure of her stolen lifeline. The line went dead silent for a fraction of a second. My mother realized her tactical error the moment the question hung in the air between us. She had just demanded I contact a Manhattan auction house to retrieve a necklace she was supposed to be keeping secure in a residential wall safe until the probate court finalized the estate inventory. She needed to bridge the gap between her previous actions and her current crisis, without admitting she had bypassed the legal system. People who rely on manipulation possess a remarkable ability to pivot under pressure. They do not pause to reconsider their ethical footing. They simply invent a new reality and demand you accept it as the truth. "They are holding Chloe Necklace hostage," Georgia Linda shouted through the phone speaker. Her tone shifted from breathless panic to righteous indignation. "You deal with contracts and lawyers all day long. You know how to talk to these corporate intake clerks. Call them right now and confirm Sylvia gave it to her." I glanced at the digital interface on my desk. The call recording software was already capturing every audio frequency of her demand. The blinking red indicator light served as a silent witness to her unspooling deception. "Why would I confirm that, Mom?" I asked. My voice remained clinically detached, carrying no trace of accusation. I merely sounded like a confused professional trying to organize a timeline. "The estate is not settled. Why would an auction house release a probate asset based on a phone call?" Because Grandma promised it to her verbally before she died, Linda lied, weaving a spontaneous fiction with flawless conviction. She wanted Chloe to have the entire collection to support her business. You know how much Sylvia believed in her brand. She told us to take the pieces before the lawyers locked everything up in paperwork. I sat back in my chair and listened to her construct a spectacular, unforced error. To understand the magnitude of the lie, you have to understand the woman she was lying about. Sylvia was a pragmatic child of the Depression who survived by trusting compound interest and municipal bonds. She despised fabricated luxury. 3 years ago, Chloe presented our grandmother with a glossy printed business plan, seeking a startup loan for her event planning agency. Sylvia reviewed the projected profit margins, noted the exorbitant marketing budget, and handed the folder back across the kitchen table. She told Chloe that buying followers on social media did not constitute a viable business strategy. Sylvia would never fund an enterprise she viewed as a sinking ship. She certainly would never issue a verbal deathbed command to liquidate her prized Cartier Sapphire to pay a commercial landlord in Hoboken. But Linda did not care about historical accuracy. She cared about immediate survival. She needed me to validate a verbal contract, because verbal contracts leave no paper trail. In her blind panic to secure the consignment cash, Linda failed to track her own lies. She was playing multiple games on different boards, and she just moved a piece that trapped her own king. Just a few days prior, Linda had initiated a formal claim with a national insurance carrier. She submitted a sworn statement reporting the entire vintage jewelry collection as lost or stolen by anonymous hospice nurses. She provided a detailed narrative of arriving at the house, opening the steel safe, and finding it empty. She signed an affidavit under penalty of perjury to initiate a 6-figure financial payout to her own checking account. Now, on a recorded telephone line with a certified actuary, she was executing a massive structural contradiction. She explicitly stated that Sylvia verbally gifted the collection to Chloe. She confirmed she was present when this supposed transfer occurred. She admitted she knew Chloe took physical possession of the items before the lawyers locked everything up. Most importantly, she acknowledged that she currently knew the exact location of the sapphire necklace. She knew it was sitting inside a Manhattan auction house, and she was actively demanding I help retrieve it. If Linda knew Sylvia gave the jewelry to Chloe, and if Linda knew Chloe took the jewelry to New York, then Linda knew the hospice nurses did not steal it. She had just detonated her own insurance fraud operation. You cannot file a police report claiming medical staff robbed your home while simultaneously asking your older daughter to help your younger daughter fence the stolen goods across state lines. The two narratives cancel each other out, leaving only the underlying crime exposed to the light. I did not interrupt her. When a suspect is actively providing you with the rope required to end their charade, you do not snatch it from their hands. You offer them more slack. I let her talk for 4 uninterrupted minutes. I placed the phone on speaker and typed a few notes on my keyboard as she rambled. Linda filled the dead air with a torrent of contradictory statements. She blamed the auction house for operating archaic security protocols. She blamed the estate attorney for moving too slowly on the paperwork. She even attempted to leverage my own professional success against me. She stated that because I possessed a healthy retirement account and a secure corporate salary, I lacked the empathy required to understand Chloe's desperate situation. She framed her facilitation of grand larceny as an act of profound maternal sacrifice. She painted a picture where she and Chloe were brave entrepreneurs fighting against a rigid, unfair system. She requested that I draft a legal affidavit on my firm letterhead attesting to the fictional deathbed conversation. She wanted me to risk my actuarial license and commit perjury to rescue them from a trap they built themselves. The audio file was growing larger by the second, capturing every single request to subvert the law. It was the most valuable piece of digital evidence I had ever collected. Just send them an email from your corporate account, Georgia. Linda pleaded, her voice dropping into a manipulative whine. Tell them you are the co-executor and you authorize the consignment. Chloe is crying in the lobby of her apartment building. Her landlord is threatening to lock her studio doors by Friday. We just need this one little favor to tide her over. Family helps family when things get tough. She finally exhausted her supply of manufactured outrage and emotional appeals. She fell silent, waiting for my confirmation. She expected to hear the familiar sigh of her reliable workhorse preparing to pull her cart out of the mud. I reached forward and placed my hand over the computer mouse. I saved the active audio recording and verified the file path. I understand the situation, Mom, I said. My voice was stripped of all warmth, providing a perfectly smooth, reflective surface. I have everything I need. I will handle it appropriately. I tapped the red icon on my screen and terminated the call. I did not elaborate on what handling it appropriately actually meant. I allowed her to interpret my compliance through her own distorted lens. I knew she was currently texting Chloe, assuring her that the quiet older sister was drafting a legal threat to the auction house. They were likely pouring a glass of wine in Cherry Hill, believing they had successfully navigated a minor crisis. I transferred the newly minted audio confession to the encrypted folder on my hard drive. It sat perfectly adjacent to the downloaded insurance claim documents. The puzzle was finished. The diagnostic phase of my operation was officially complete. I possessed the irrevocable trust documents proving my ownership. I held the auction house seizure records, proving Chloe attempted to fence the asset. I retained the sworn insurance affidavit proving Linda committed fraud. And I now held the recorded confession tying the entire conspiracy together. An actuary spends their life identifying risk. But when the risk transforms into active malice, you do not just observe the data, you deploy the countermeasures. The time for silent observation was over. It was time to transition from passive data collection to active legal warfare. I opened a new browser window and searched for a highly specialized attorney. I did not need a mediator or a family counselor. I needed a ruthless probate litigator who understood how to dismantle a fraudulent estate claim brick by brick. The The quiet suburban illusion in Cherry Hill was about to receive a formal introduction to the federal justice system. With the audio confession securely archived on multiple encrypted servers and the physical asset effectively trapped inside a Manhattan vault, the defensive perimeter was fully established. I had monitored their actions closely over the preceding weeks, cataloging every misstep and calculating their precise vulnerability. They operated under the assumption that family ties insulated them from the rule of law. They believed that because I shared their surname, I was obligated to absorb their financial betrayals in silence. It was time to introduce them to an entirely different set of rules. I initiated the formal legal offensive. I did not schedule a family intervention. I did not attempt to draft a carefully worded email appealing to their sense of basic morality. When dealing with individuals who actively commit felony fraud to sustain a fabricated lifestyle, attempting to reason with them is a tactical error. They will simply interpret your diplomatic approach as an opportunity to manipulate the narrative further. You must speak to them exclusively through the uncompromising language of the judicial system. I needed a proxy who lacked any sentimental attachment to the Cherry Hill household. I required a legal representative who viewed my mother and my sister not as relatives making mistakes, but as hostile actors obstructing a corporate trust. I opened a new browser tab and searched the legal directory for the state of New Jersey. I bypassed the general practice attorneys and the mediation specialists. I located a highly specialized probate litigator based in Newark named Arthur Sterling. His online professional biography detailed a lengthy career dismantling corrupt executors and recovering misappropriated estate assets. His firm reputation rested on a foundation of aggressive, unyielding litigation. He was exactly the kind of weapon I needed to deploy. I contacted his office and scheduled an immediate consultation. I arrived at his high-rise suite carrying a single, locked briefcase. I did not spend the hour recounting childhood grievances or complaining about Chloe's unearned status as the golden child. A skilled attorney does not care about your emotional history. They care about verifiable documentation. I placed the certified documents establishing the irrevocable blind trust on his mahogany desk. I provided the itemized schedule of the vintage jewelry collection, complete with the registered serial numbers. I produced the time-stamped email from the Manhattan auction house confirming the seizure of the Cartier Sapphire necklace. Finally, I handed him a thumb drive containing the audio recording of Linda explicitly confirming she allowed Chloe to take physical possession of the assets. Mr. Sterling reviewed the paperwork methodically. He did not offer sympathetic nods or platitudes. He analyzed the evidence the same way I analyze a corporate risk matrix. Your mother has placed herself in a remarkably precarious position, Ms. Georgia, he stated, leaning back in his leather chair. She has attempted to bypass the probate court entirely. By physically removing items that legally belong to a separate corporate entity, she has committed grand larceny. Furthermore, the audio recording strongly suggests a coordinated effort to fence stolen property across state lines. He closed the file folder and looked at me across the desk. How do you wish to proceed? I want to secure the remaining physical assets before she attempts to liquidate anything else. I replied, my voice carrying a flat, clinical detachment. I want you to file the trust documents with the probate court immediately, and I want you to issue a formal, binding demand letter to Linda in her capacity as the prospective estate executor. Mr. Sterling nodded a sharp, decisive movement, acknowledging the strategy. A demand letter from a specialized litigator is not a polite request. It is a legal ultimatum designed to strip away the illusion of safety. On my behalf, his office drafted a devastating piece of correspondence. The letter did not ask Linda to return the jewelry for the sake of family harmony. It explicitly outlined her unauthorized removal of high-value assets belonging to an independent corporate trust. It detailed the seizure of the sapphire necklace at the auction house. Most importantly, it mandated the immediate surrender of the entire remaining vintage jewelry collection within 7 business days. The document concluded with a stark, definitive warning. Failure to comply with the 7-day mandate would result in immediate civil litigation for asset recovery and a formal referral to local law enforcement for the investigation of grand larceny. Mr. Sterling dispatched the letter via certified overnight courier, requiring a direct signature upon delivery. He simultaneously filed the official, irrevocable trust documents with the New Jersey Probate Court, placing a hard legal freeze on any further distribution of Sylvia assets. The trap Sylvia and I designed in her hospice room was now a matter of public record. The arrival of the certified envelope shattered the quiet, curated suburban illusion in Cherry Hill. For 2 decades, Linda operated her household as an absolute autocracy. She dictated the terms of success and failure. She decided which daughter received the spotlight and which daughter received the shadows. She treated the family wealth as her own personal treasury, dispensing favors and withholding resources to maintain her supreme authority. When the courier knocked on her front door and handed her the thick envelope bearing the seal of a prominent Newark litigation firm, that authority evaporated instantly. She opened the package, expecting routine paperwork regarding the estate closure. She expected a simple form requiring her signature to finalize her control over her mother's legacy. Instead, she found a meticulously detailed invoice of her own crimes. The legal language used in the demand letter stripped away her maternal shield. It did not address her as a grieving daughter or a dedicated mother. It addressed her as a hostile actor in possession of stolen corporate property. The document transformed her from the matriarch of Cherry Hill into a prospective defendant facing severe civil penalties and potential criminal charges. The game of favorites was officially terminated. The informal estate distributions in the living room and the secret handoffs of valuable heirlooms were over. They were replaced by the stringent, unyielding rules of formal asset recovery. My mobile phone remained silent for the first 48 hours following the delivery of the letter. The sudden lack of frantic calls and manipulative texts indicated a profound structural shock. Linda and Chloe were likely sitting in the Cherry Hill living room, staring at the demand letter, attempting to process the sudden shift in power. They were accustomed to an older sister who quietly absorbed their insults and funded their mistakes. They were entirely unprepared for an actuary who weaponized a corporate trust to execute a flawless checkmate. But silence from desperate individuals rarely lasts. A cornered animal will eventually attempt to break out of the snare, regardless of the damage it inflicts upon itself. The 7-day mandate was a ticking clock. Chloe was facing an imminent commercial eviction in Hoboken, and her primary source of bailout capital was currently locked inside an auction house vault. The realization that I was actively prosecuting the theft instead of covering it up would inevitably force her into a chaotic, erratic confrontation. She could no longer hide behind our mother-fabricated narratives. She was going to have to face the architect of her ruin directly. I continued my daily routine in Jersey City, maintaining my professional composure while preparing for the inevitable ambush that would occur when the golden child finally ran out of options. The psychological impact of a formal legal demand letter is immediate and profound. When an individual accustomed to manipulating informal family dynamics suddenly receives a certified document drafted by a specialized litigator, their entire worldview destabilizes. They realize their preferred currency of emotional coercion is utterly worthless inside a courtroom. The 7-day mandate to surrender the stolen vintage jewelry collection stripped away the remaining illusions in Cherry Hill. Linda could no longer shield her favorite daughter from the consequences of her own financial incompetence. The barrier had finally collapsed. This structural failure triggered a desperate, erratic response from the golden child. Chloe had spent her entire adult life relying on our mother to function as her personal crisis manager. When her boutique event planning business first started hemorrhaging capital, Linda quietly transferred funds from her own savings to cover the initial deficits. When Chloe defaulted on vendor payments, Linda blamed the suppliers for lacking creative vision. But Linda could not charm her way out of grand larceny, and she certainly could not force a Manhattan auction house to release a seized asset. For the first time in 30 years, Chloe was entirely exposed to the elements. She had to face the reality of her impending bankruptcy without a parental buffer. On a Thursday evening, 4 days after the delivery of the legal notice, I concluded a complex risk modeling session for a corporate client. I packed my leather briefcase, turned off my dual monitors, and took the elevator down to the subterranean parking garage beneath my Jersey City office building. The air in the concrete structure was damp and carried the faint metallic scent of vehicle exhaust. I walked toward my reserved parking space, my footsteps echoing sharply against the pavement. As I approached my sedan, a figure detached itself from the shadow of a concrete support pillar. It was Chloe. She had bypassed our mother entirely and traveled from Hoboken to execute a direct physical ambush. The visual contrast between her current appearance and the polished influencer persona she typically projected was jarring. At the Thanksgiving dinner table just weeks prior, she had worn pristine silk and vintage diamond earrings while boasting about her imminent capital injection. Tonight, she wore a stained, oversized hooded sweatshirt and gray sweatpants. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her face was pale, drawn, and devoid of her usual meticulous makeup. The manufactured luxury had evaporated, leaving only the raw, frantic panic of a debtor who had finally run out of extensions. She stepped aggressively into the center of the driving lane, physically blocking my path to the driver's side door. "You are destroying me, Georgia," she cried out, her voice echoing loudly in the cavernous garage. Her tone was sharp and saturated with genuine terror. She did not offer a greeting. She did not attempt to apologize for stealing our grandmother's sapphire necklace. She immediately launched into a frantic, disorganized monologue designed to weaponize her own ruin against me. She stood trembling under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the parking deck. "My landlord is locking the doors to my studio space on Friday," she continued, her words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "He filed the final eviction notice this morning. The floral distributors are freezing my corporate accounts. My entire business is collapsing. If I do not sell that jewelry this week, I lose everything. I am going to have to file for bankruptcy." I stopped walking. I maintained a strict physical distance of at least 6 feet. I did not drop my briefcase or reach out to comfort her. I observed her the way an actuary observes a catastrophic data set. She was listing the precise consequences of her own terrible decisions, but she was presenting them to me as if they were unprovoked attacks I had personally orchestrated. She genuinely believed that my refusal to be a victim of her theft was the actual source of her current trauma. She expected the reliable older sister to automatically absorb the impact of her financial disaster. In her distorted logic, because I earned a stable salary and lived within my means, I possessed a moral obligation to liquidate my own inheritance to save her failing enterprise. She viewed my stability not as the result of hard work, but as a surplus resource she was entitled to tap whenever her own reserves ran dry. "You have to call your lawyers and dissolve that stupid trust," she demanded, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. "You have to withdraw the probate claim right now. Call the auction house tomorrow and tell them the necklace belongs to me. Tell them Grandma promised it to me. You can fix this, Georgia. You have plenty of money. You do not even care about vintage jewelry. You are just doing this to punish me because Mom always liked me best." I looked at her. I searched my own internal landscape for any trace of residual sympathy or familial obligation. I found none. The reservoir of sisterly affection had drained completely dry over 2 decades of constant, subtle erasure. Every time she accepted a bailout funded by my exclusion, she eroded the foundation of our relationship. There was nothing left to salvage. "You spent your entire adult life treating my boundaries as minor suggestions." "Chloe," I stated. My tone was analytical and completely flat, devoid of any rising anger. I did not raise my voice to match her hysteria. "You walked into my childhood home, you opened a safe, and you took a $60,000 asset that did not belong to you." I continued, clearly articulating the sequence of events. You then transported that asset across state lines and attempted to fence stolen property at an elite auction house to cover your own gross incompetence. She opened her mouth to interrupt, but the cold, objective reality of my words paralyzed her vocal cords. Your massive commercial debt is not my deficit to balance, I told her, holding her frantic gaze with steady, unwavering eye contact. I am not dissolving a legal trust to fund a failing boutique agency. I am not committing perjury to validate a fictional deathbed promise. You built a business on a foundation of lies and unpaid invoices. The structure is finally collapsing. I suggest you contact a bankruptcy attorney instead of ambushing me in a parking garage. I gripped the handle of my briefcase. I stepped deliberately to the right, moving smoothly around her rigid, trembling form. She did not attempt to block me a second time. The absolute finality of my refusal had severed the last thread of her manipulative leverage. I unlocked my vehicle, placed my briefcase on the passenger seat, and settled behind the steering wheel. I started the ignition. The engine hummed quietly in the damp concrete enclosure. I engaged the transmission and pulled out of the parking space. As I drove toward the exit ramp, I glanced briefly in the rearview mirror. Chloe was still standing exactly where I had left her. She looked small and entirely isolated under the flickering fluorescent lights. She was finally experiencing the crushing gravity of a crisis she could not charm or borrow her way out of. The golden child was alone in the dark, facing a Friday deadline she could not meet. I accelerated up the ramp and merged into the heavy evening traffic of Jersey City. The encounter in the garage confirmed that the pressure was effectively dismantling their operation. But I knew that Chloe Panic was only one half of the equation. If she was currently facing commercial eviction, her mother was undoubtedly facing an even steeper cliff. Linda had initiated a massive fraudulent insurance claim based entirely on the false premise that the jewelry was stolen by hospice workers. My attorney filing the trust documents with the probate court and flagging the necklace at the auction house had created a sprawling digital footprint. Corporate databases frequently communicate with one another. I knew the moment the insurance carrier fraud prevention unit cross-referenced my legal filings with Linda's sworn affidavit, the entire house of cards in Cherry Hill would spontaneously combust. The focus of the battle was about to shift dramatically from a familial dispute over heirlooms into a severe federal investigation of insurance fraud, and I was fully prepared to provide the investigators with every single piece of audio evidence they required. The illusion of safety in white-collar crime relies heavily on the assumption that institutional bureaucracies are too fragmented to communicate effectively. My mother, Linda, operated under the belief that she could file a massive insurance claim reporting stolen heirlooms to a national carrier, while simultaneously handing those exact items to Chloe without triggering a unified response. She assumed the probate court in New Jersey and the jewelry auction house in Manhattan functioned in complete isolation. She severely underestimated the technological integration of modern financial compliance. The consequences of my aggressive legal strategy quickly breached the localized walls of the county surrogate court. When Arthur Sterling, my specialized probate litigator, formally logged the irrevocable blind trust documents and recorded the official asset seizure notice into the public docket, it generated a sprawling digital footprint. Commercial databases are deeply interconnected, specifically to identify anomalies and prevent large-scale fraud. Within 48 hours of Sterling filing the paperwork, an automated cross-referencing algorithm tripped a critical alert deep within the risk management servers of Sylvia Homeowner Insurance Agency. The system detected two fundamentally incompatible legal claims simultaneously attached to the identical serial numbers of a vintage Cartier Sapphire necklace. On a Tuesday morning, I sat in my Jersey City office reviewing a dense spreadsheet of actuarial tables. The interface of my primary monitor displayed a sudden incoming email notification. The sender address did not belong to a corporate client or a colleague. It originated from the specialized fraud prevention unit of a major national insurance conglomerate. The message was succinct and entirely devoid of polite conversational filler. A senior investigator named Marcus Vance introduced himself. He stated he was currently conducting a priority review of a significant loss claim filed against a policy where I was listed as an authorized administrative contact. He requested a brief telephone interview to clarify a few discrepancies regarding the scheduled high-value items. I did not reply with a suggested time for a phone call. When you hold irrefutable evidence of a felony, you do not whisper it over a cellular connection. You present it in a secure, controlled environment where the gravity of the documentation cannot be easily dismissed or misunderstood. I replied to his email proposing an immediate in-person meeting at my accounting firm suite. Mr. Vance accepted without hesitation. He arrived at 1 o'clock that afternoon. He possessed the quiet, unhurried demeanor of a man who spent decades dismantling complex deceptions. He wore a simple gray suit and carried a slim leather portfolio. He did not offer excessive pleasantries. He took the chair opposite my glass desk, retrieved a legal pad, and placed a small digital audio recorder on the smooth surface between us. "Ms. Georgia," he began his voice, carrying a flat, practiced neutrality. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting. I am currently investigating a substantial claim filed by Linda regarding the total loss of a vintage jewelry collection belonging to your late grandmother." He paused to flip open a manila folder, reviewing his internal notes. "Your mother submitted a sworn affidavit and a corresponding municipal police report stating the entire collection, including a diamond and sapphire centerpiece, was stolen from a residential safe by medical hospice personnel shortly before her passing." He looked up from the file, his eyes locking onto mine, attempting to read my baseline reaction. "However, our system has recently detected a legal filing from your attorney in a neighboring jurisdiction. This filing indicates that the specific sapphire necklace in question was not stolen by medical staff, but was instead recently seized by a Manhattan auction house while in the possession of your sister, Chloe." He tapped his pen lightly against the legal pad. "These two narratives are mutually exclusive. I need to understand if the estate is currently attempting to recover the value of the asset through our policy while simultaneously possessing the physical item." I sat perfectly still. I did not experience a sudden urge to defend my mother. I did not feel a familiar tug of familial loyalty demanding I invent a plausible excuse to cover her tracks. She had willingly accused innocent healthcare workers of grand larceny to line her own pockets while she simultaneously facilitated the theft of my inheritance to fund the golden child. The time for protecting the Cherry Hill illusion had officially expired. I reached into the top drawer of my desk. I extracted a small silver thumb drive and placed it directly next to his digital recorder. "Mr. Vance," I stated, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of emotional inflection, "the estate is not attempting to double-dip your carrier. My mother is acting entirely outside of her legal authority. She is actively attempting to defraud your institution to cover up a separate crime she committed against a corporate trust I manage." The investigator stopped tapping his pen. He leaned slightly forward, a flicker of intense professional interest replacing his neutral facade. "Please elaborate," he instructed. "The vintage jewelry collection does not belong to the general probate estate. It belongs to an irrevocable blind trust I established with my grandmother 6 months prior to her death," I explained methodically. "I am the sole trustee. My mother bypassed the legal inventory process. She physically opened the residential wall safe and removed the assets. She then handed them directly to my sister Chloe." I pointed to the silver thumb drive resting on the glass. "That drive contains 3 key pieces of evidence. First, it holds the certified trust documents and the registered serial numbers proving my exclusive ownership of the collection. Second, it contains the formal seizure notice from the Manhattan auction house, confirming Chloe attempted to consign the sapphire necklace for an upcoming winter estate sale." Mr. Vance picked up the drive, turning it slowly over in his palm. "And the third piece," he asked, his gaze sharpening. The third piece is a high-definition audio recording of a telephone conversation between myself and Linda. I replied, holding his stare. In that recording, she explicitly admits that she knew the entire collection was in Chloe physical possession. Furthermore, she explicitly attempts to coerce me into drafting a fraudulent legal document to force the auction house to release the seized asset back to my sister. The silence in my office stretched for a long moment. The investigator processed the sheer, staggering magnitude of the evidence I had just handed him. He understood immediately that he was no longer investigating a simple, misunderstood property transfer or a delayed probate filing. He realized he was holding an airtight confession to a massive insurance fraud operation. If your mother knew your sister possessed the jewelry when she filed the loss claim, and the police report he summarized, slowly tracing the logical sequence out loud. Then she committed perjury and felony insurance fraud by falsely accusing the hospice staff of theft. I concluded, finishing the thought for him. The math is undeniably clear. She filed the claim specifically to extract a $50,000 preliminary payout to enrich her own retirement funds while allowing Chloe to sell the physical assets for her boutique business. Mr. Vance did not ask any further clarifying questions. He possessed a recorded confession, a verified timeline of the theft, and the exact physical location of the stolen goods. The investigation was essentially complete before it even truly began. He placed the thumb drive securely inside his leather portfolio and clicked his pen shut. "Thank you for your extensive cooperation, Ms. Georgia," he said, standing up from the chair. "This evidence fundamentally alters the trajectory of our internal review." The agency acted with terrifying speed. Within 24 hours of our meeting, the national carrier immediately halted the pending $50,000 preliminary payout check they had prepared for Linda. They formally denied the massive homeowner claim in its entirety. Furthermore, they transferred her complete file, including the audio recording and the police report, from the standard claims adjusting department directly into their internal legal prosecution division. My mother had spent her entire adult life bending reality to suit her narrative and shielding her favorite daughter from accountability. She assumed she was executing a brilliant victimless crime that would seamlessly fund her retirement and save Chloe, failing event planning agency. Instead, she had just walked blindly into a federal trap entirely of her own making. But I knew Linda would not surrender quietly. The realization that she was facing severe civil penalties and a potential criminal indictment would force her to launch one final desperate offensive. She would inevitably attempt to utilize the upcoming scheduled probate mediation meeting to intimidate me into dropping the trust lawsuit. She thought she could still bully me across a conference table into saving her from disaster. I packed my briefcase and prepared to deliver the final killing blow on the official legal record. The collapse of a fabricated reality rarely occurs in silence. When an individual who has spent decades controlling the narrative suddenly finds themselves cornered by verifiable facts, they do not surrender gracefully. They escalate their tactics, attempting to bully the opposing party back into compliance. The rapid sequence of legal filings I initiated stripped Linda of her maternal authority and exposed her to devastating financial liability. The 7-day mandate to surrender the stolen vintage jewelry expired without a response from the Cherry Hill residents. The formal demand letter from my specialized probate litigator Arthur Sterling hung heavily over the estate like a suspended blade. But the most significant pressure was invisible to my family. They were entirely unaware that I had handed a recorded confession of their insurance fraud to a senior investigator at their national carrier. They believed they were merely fighting a civil inheritance dispute. They assumed the battle was still confined to the parameters of family jealousy. Cornered by the mounting stress of an impending lawsuit and desperate to retrieve the $60,000 sapphire necklace impounded in Manhattan, Linda authorized her legal counsel to act. Her attorney mandated a formal sit-down mediation session to settle the dispute outside the jurisdiction of a courtroom. They scheduled the meeting for a Wednesday morning at a neutral conference room located in a sleek commercial building in Morristown. Linda viewed this mediation not as a negotiation, but as a staging ground for a final, decisive lecture. She planned to utilize the formal setting to intimidate me into dropping the trust claims and releasing her favorite daughter from the jaws of bankruptcy. She still believed I was the quiet, compliant older sister who would inevitably fold under sustained pressure. I arrived at the Morristown facility 15 minutes early. I wore a structured charcoal blazer and dark slacks, the professional uniform of a senior actuary preparing to dismantle a faulty algorithm. I carried a single leather briefcase. Arthur Sterling walked beside me, projecting the calm, predatory focus of a litigator who already knows the outcome of the impending dispute. We entered the designated conference room. It was an austere space, featuring a long, polished mahogany table and panoramic windows overlooking the sprawling suburban landscape. We selected seats on one side of the table and waited. Linda and Chloe arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. The visual presentation of my family was a masterclass in manufactured optics. Linda wore a sharply tailored navy blazer and a string of pearls. She walked into the room attempting to project an aura of composed authority, treating the legal setting as if she were chairing a neighborhood committee meeting. She wanted to establish dominance from the moment she crossed the threshold. Chloe trailed closely behind her. The golden child was physically diminished. The polished influencer facade she curated for her boutique event planning business had completely dissolved. She wore a simple dark sweater and avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. The impending commercial eviction in Hoboken and the crushing weight of a $90,000 defaulted credit line had drained her of her usual careless arrogance. She sat down beside our mother, staring blankly at the reflection in the polished wood of the table. Linda defense attorney, a man named Robert Vance, took the seat at the head of the table. He organized his legal pads and cleared his throat, preparing to initiate the standard mediation protocols. He never got the opportunity to speak. Linda opened the meeting by seizing control of the narrative. She did not wait for the attorneys to establish the parameters of the discussion. She immediately launched into a practiced, venomous monologue, directed entirely at me. She leaned forward, resting her forearms on the edge of the mahogany table. She locked her gaze onto my face, her eyes blazing with a mixture of genuine fury and performative indignation. "This entire situation is a grotesque embarrassment, Georgia," she began, her voice echoing sharply in the quiet room. Her tone was saturated with the familiar condescension she used throughout my childhood, whenever I questioned her blatant favoritism. She attempted to gaslight the room using the mediation setting to rewrite history on the official record. She painted a vivid picture of a bitter, jealous older sibling who spent her entire life resenting her younger sister's success. She framed my actions not as the legal defense of a corporate trust, but as a malicious vendetta designed to destroy Chloe Boutique Agency during a temporary period of vulnerability. You sit in your sterile apartment running numbers on a spreadsheet, and you cannot stand the fact that Chloe is actually building something beautiful. Linda continued, her voice rising in volume. Sylvia always favored Chloe, creative spirit. She promised those vintage pieces to her, specifically, to help her brand flourish. You know this is the truth. I sat perfectly still. I did not shift my weight in the leather chair. I did not cross my arms or offer a single micro-expression of defense. In actuarial science, you do not argue with a flawed data set. You simply let the errors compound until the entire model collapses under its own structural weight. Linda interpreted my silence as a vulnerability. She mistook my clinical detachment for submission and accelerated her attack. You fabricated these ridiculous legal loopholes out of thin air, she stated, jabbing a finger toward the empty space between us. You convinced some predatory lawyer to draft a phony corporate trust while Sylvia was heavily medicated in hospice care, just to steal your sister's rightful inheritance. It is a disgusting manipulation of a dying woman. She turned her attention briefly toward Arthur Sterling, attempting to draw my attorney into her web of manufactured outrage. Those trust documents are somehow invalid, and you know it, she declared confidently. Sylvia would never agree to lock away her jewelry in a blind corporate entity. She gave the sapphire necklace to Chloe verbally, and I facilitated the transfer as the intended executor of the estate. Arthur Sterling remained entirely silent. He did not interrupt her monologue to defend the legality of the trust or correct her aggressive assumptions. He sat beside me, taking methodical notes on his yellow legal pad. A skilled litigator knows the immense strategic value of allowing a hostile witness to speak freely on an official record. He was intentionally providing her with enough rope to hang herself. Linda was actively constructing a massive, precarious house of cards in front of two witnesses and opposing counsel. She was explicitly claiming the irrevocable trust was fraudulent. She was loudly confirming that she personally facilitated the physical transfer of the $60,000 necklace to Chloe prior to the completion of the probate inventory. She was demanding I immediately drop the civil lawsuit, dissolve the corporate entity, and instruct the Manhattan auction house to release the seized asset back into Chloe possession. She expected me to absorb her vitriol, apologize for causing a disruption, and sign whatever waiver she pushed across the table to restore the family peace. She believed her aggressive posture would force me into a rapid capitulation to save her favorite daughter from bankruptcy. She exhausted her supply of manufactured outrage after nearly 10 uninterrupted minutes. She finally leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her tailored blazer. She offered a tight, satisfied smile, assuming she had successfully dominated the mediation and secured her victory. The conference room descended into a heavy, profound silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the building ventilation system. Linda defense attorney Robert Vance looked expectantly toward Arthur Sterling, anticipating a standard negotiated counteroffer. I did not wait for my legal counsel to respond. I had allowed her to outline her entire defense strategy in excruciating detail. She had proudly claimed ownership of the narrative and placed all her chips on the assumption that I possessed no leverage beyond a simple inheritance dispute. I unfolded my hands from my lap. It was time to introduce the real variables into the equation and demonstrate exactly how much damage a quiet, reliable actuary can inflict when they finally stop absorbing the deficit. I reached for the brass clasps on my leather briefcase. The ambient noise inside the Morristown conference room vanished entirely when Linda exhausted her supply of manufactured outrage. She leaned back against her leather chair, wearing the self-satisfied expression of a woman who genuinely believed her volume had secured a legal victory. She had spent 10 minutes loudly dismantling my character and constructing a fictional narrative where she and Chloe were the victims of a malicious sister. She assumed her performance had sufficiently intimidated Arthur Sterling into advising his client to surrender the assets. She expected me to absorb the vitriol, lower my gaze, and sign the necessary waivers to release the $60,000 sapphire necklace from the Manhattan auction house vault. I did not lower my gaze. I did not engage in the emotional warfare she was desperately attempting to initiate. An actuary does not argue with a flawed data set. You present the correct mathematics, and you let the structure collapse under the weight of its own inconsistencies. I rested my hands on the brass clasps of my leather briefcase. The sharp, metallic clicks echoed clearly in the silent room. I opened the lid and carefully extracted 3 pristine manila folders. I placed the first stack of paper directly in the center of the polished mahogany table. These are the certified documents establishing the irrevocable blind trust, Mom, I stated. My voice was calm, carrying the flat, clinical cadence of a boardroom presentation. You claimed earlier that this entity was fabricated while Sylvia was heavily medicated in hospice. These documents were drafted by an independent wealth management firm, notarized by a third party, and officially filed with the state registry a full 6 months before her cognitive decline. Furthermore, they contain her verified signature, transferring sole legal ownership of the entire vintage jewelry collection, including the Cartier sapphire necklace and the diamond tennis earrings, directly to me. Linda's expression faltered slightly, but she maintained her aggressive posture. She waved a dismissive hand toward the paper. "That means nothing, Georgia," she scoffed. "A piece of paper does not negate a verbal promise. Grandma wanted Chloe to have those pieces for her boutique event planning business. I simply facilitated her final wishes." I retrieved the second manila folder and placed it squarely beside the first. This is the formal seizure notice generated by the Manhattan auction house. I continued, pointing to the printed letterhead. It details the precise date and time Chloe transported a flagged corporate asset across state lines and attempted to consign the necklace for a winter estate sale. The auction house impounded the jewelry under international stolen property protocols. It is currently locked in a maximum security vault and will not be returned to her without a judge order. Chloe visibly flinched. The golden child stared blankly at the seizure notice resting on the wood grain. The crushing reality of her $90,000 defaulted commercial line of credit and her impending commercial eviction in Hoboken suddenly eclipsed her mother-confident monologue. She realized her financial lifeline was permanently severed. Linda leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She attempted to deploy her usual tactic of shifting the blame. "You are sick, Georgia," she hissed. "You intentionally tracked your own sister like a criminal just to sabotage her capital injection. You are deliberately trying to bankrupt her out of petty spite." I did not react to the insult. I reached into my briefcase one final time. I withdrew the third and thickest folder. I placed it gently on top of the other two documents, completing the stack. "I am not tracking a criminal, Mom," I corrected her smoothly. "I am merely auditing a felony." I tapped my index finger against the top page of the final folder. "This is a printed transcript of the audio recording I captured in our living room in Cherry Hill 2 weeks after the funeral. It is the exact moment you explicitly admitted to physically opening the residential wall safe, removing the jewelry collection, and handing it directly to Chloe because you decided she needed it for her brand." I paused, allowing the weight of that statement to settle over the table. Directly beside that transcript, I added, sliding a second document into view, is a certified copy of the massive homeowner insurance claim you filed 3 days after Sylvia passing. You submitted a sworn police report and a signed affidavit under penalty of perjury. You reported the entire vintage jewelry collection, including the sapphire necklace, as lost or stolen by the anonymous hospice nurses who cared for her. The temperature in the conference room seemed to plummet. The aggressive, performative energy radiating from Linda evaporated instantly. The muscles around her jaw slackened. Her eyes darted rapidly between the printed transcript of her confession and the formal insurance affidavit bearing her signature. She was looking at an inescapable mathematical contradiction. You cannot verbally promise a $60,000 necklace to your daughter, physically hand it to her in a living room, and simultaneously file a federal insurance claim stating medical staff robbed your home. I explained, outlining the precise mechanics of her disaster. You were actively attempting to double-dip the financial system. You wanted Chloe to fence the physical asset in New York to save her sinking boutique, while you extracted a $50,000 cash payout from the insurance carrier to pad your own retirement accounts. I folded my hands and looked directly into her widening, terrified eyes. You did not just steal my inheritance, I stated clearly. You committed grand larceny by removing assets from a corporate trust. You committed wire fraud when Chloe transported the stolen goods across state lines. And you committed felony insurance fraud by falsely accusing innocent healthcare workers of theft. Linda defense attorney, a man named Robert Vance, had remained entirely silent during the exchange. He sat at the head of the table, gripping his pen tightly. When I placed the final folder detailing the insurance fraud on the mahogany surface, his hand stopped moving entirely. The pen froze in midair above his yellow legal pad. He stared at his client with an expression of profound professional horror. In the span of 3 minutes, he realized the woman sitting beside him had not merely engaged in a contentious inheritance dispute. She had actively lied to her own legal counsel, concealed a massive, ongoing criminal enterprise, and just confessed to a sequence of felonies on the official record of a mediation session. He was suddenly representing a primary suspect in a federal investigation. "You are bluffing," Linda whispered, her voice stripped of its arrogant resonance. It sounded thin and fragile. "You would never hand this over to the police. I am your mother. You would never send your own family to prison over some vintage jewelry." I leaned back in my chair, matching her earlier relaxed posture. "I do not need to hand this over to the police, Mom," I replied, holding her panicked gaze. "Corporate databases are deeply interconnected. The moment my attorney, Arthur Sterling, filed the irrevocable trust documents and the auction house seizure notice into the public probate docket, it triggered an automated alert at your homeowner insurance agency." I watched the last remaining trace of color drain from her face, leaving her skin a stark, sickly white. "A senior fraud investigator named Marcus Vance visited my office in Jersey City yesterday afternoon," I informed her. "I handed him a thumb drive containing the high-definition audio recording of your confession alongside the auction house consignment records. The Carrier Investigation Unit already possesses these recordings. They have halted your preliminary payout and transferred your entire file to their internal legal prosecution division." The math was undeniably clear, and I provided them with the receipts. The silence that followed was total and absolute. It was the heavy, crushing silence of a structural collapse. Linda realized she had not outsmarted the system. She had not successfully manipulated the narrative to protect her golden child. She had blindly walked her entire family into a devastating legal trap of her own making, and the doors had just locked securely behind her. The civil mediation was no longer a negotiation over heirlooms. It was the prologue to a spectacular, unmitigated disaster that would systematically dismantle every aspect of her carefully constructed suburban life. The structural collapse of a family built entirely on enabling and manipulation is rarely a clean event. It usually involves a chaotic, frantic scramble as the participants attempt to secure their own survival at the expense of their closest allies. In the Morristown conference room, the revelation of my evidence initiated a spectacular, unmitigated disaster for the Cherry Hill household. Linda defense attorney Robert Vance did not waste a single moment attempting to salvage his client's crumbling narrative. He understood the severe professional liability associated with representing a hostile actor actively engaged in federal insurance fraud. He closed his yellow legal pad, placed his pen firmly inside his briefcase, and stood up from the mahogany table. "This mediation session is formally suspended," he announced, his voice devoid of any client privilege or supportive warmth. He directed his gaze entirely toward Arthur Sterling, bypassing Linda completely. "I will be filing a motion of recusal with the probate court immediately. I can no longer serve as legal counsel for this estate dispute, given the newly introduced material facts." Linda reached out, grasping his tailored sleeve in a desperate panic. "Robert, you cannot just leave us here," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the sudden weight of her exposure. "You have to fix this. Tell her she cannot use an illegal recording against her own mother." Vance gently but firmly detached her hand from his arm. He looked down at the woman who had routinely lied to him for weeks, fabricating a complex defense strategy based entirely on stolen assets and a fraudulent police report. "You did not merely lie to your daughter Linda," he stated, his tone sharp and clinical. "You actively lied to me, an officer of the court, while filing a massive fraudulent insurance claim. I strongly advise you to secure specialized criminal defense counsel before the end of the business day." He walked out of the room, shutting the heavy wooden door behind him. His departure finalized the isolation of the golden child and her dedicated architect. They were no longer sitting across a table negotiating with a quiet, compliant sibling. They were trapped inside a legal vacuum, facing the unyielding machinery of the justice system. The subsequent weeks dismantled their curated lives with surgical precision. The national insurance carrier moved aggressively to mitigate their exposure and punish the attempted theft. The senior fraud investigator, Marcus Vance, possessed the undeniable proof of Linda perjury. To avoid a formal referral to the federal prosecutor office for a multi-year prison sentence, Linda was forced to negotiate a brutal civil settlement agreement. The carrier required her to immediately reimburse the extensive costs of their internal investigation unit. They levied massive punitive civil fines against her for submitting the false police report blaming the hospice staff. Linda did not possess the liquid capital to satisfy the sudden six-figure demand. She had spent decades prioritizing the outward appearance of wealth over actual financial stability. To prevent her own incarceration, she was forced to execute a painful liquidation. She completely drained her primary retirement accounts, absorbing devastating early withdrawal penalties and crushing tax liabilities in the process. The comfortable, secure future she had envisioned in Cherry Hill evaporated instantly. The funds she had intended to use to subsidize Chloe's fictional event planning empire were instead wired directly to the legal department of an insurance conglomerate. The consequences cascaded rapidly into the jurisdiction of the New Jersey probate court. Arthur Sterling formally presented the irrevocable blind trust documents alongside the audio transcript of her confession to the presiding judge. The court acted swiftly and decisively. They formally stripped Linda of any and all executor privileges regarding Sylvia's remaining general estate. She was permanently barred from accessing or distributing any residual familial assets. The judge appointed an independent third-party administrator to oversee the final closure of the accounts, ensuring she could never again manipulate the ledger. While Linda navigated the catastrophic destruction of her retirement, Chloe faced her own independent reckoning in Hoboken. The $60,000 vintage sapphire necklace, currently impounded inside a Manhattan maximum security vault, was her final, desperate lifeline. She had banked her entire commercial survival on the anticipated consignment advance. With the auction house formally seizing the stolen property and locking it behind a judicial order, Chloe was entirely exposed to the elements. Her commercial landlord executed the preliminary eviction notice precisely on Friday morning as threatened. He arrived at her boutique studio space, accompanied by a municipal sheriff and a local locksmith. They physically secured the premises, installing heavy steel padlocks on the glass entrance doors. Chloe arrived at her business to find a neon orange legal notice plastered across the front window, barring her entry. The loss of her physical storefront triggered a rapid sequence of aggressive creditor actions. The regional banking institution holding her $90,000 defaulted commercial line of credit secured a formal judgment lien against her remaining assets. The Manhattan floral distributors and the specialty catering firms actively pursued their civil suits for unpaid invoices. Chloe could no longer hide behind curated social media posts projecting an image of endless luxury. The polished influencer facade dissolved completely when her corporate bank accounts were permanently frozen by court order. The suppliers seized her remaining event inventory, the bank repossessed her leased company vehicle, and the sheer volume of her liabilities forced her to initiate formal Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceedings. The financial reality they had spent their entire lives attempting to manipulate and ignore finally crushed them both under its own immense weight. The systemic enabling that had defined our family dynamic for 3 decades was permanently dismantled. 1 week after the disastrous mediation session in Morristown, I sat at my desk in Jersey City, reviewing a complex actuarial risk model. The secure reception desk on the ground floor of my office building contacted me via the internal intercom system. They informed me a specialized bonded courier required my physical signature for a high-value delivery. I took the elevator down to the lobby. The courier handed me a heavy, reinforced steel lockbox and a clipboard containing a chain of custody manifest. I signed my actual signature, the authentic script my mother had attempted to bypass, and accepted the package. I carried the lockbox back up to my private suite. I placed it gently on the surface of my glass desk. I inputted the secure numerical code provided by Arthur Sterling and released the heavy latch. Inside the velvet-lined interior rested the entire vintage jewelry collection. The pieces had been legally and permanently transferred into my physical possession. The Manhattan auction house had released the impounded sapphire necklace following a swift judicial order confirming my sole ownership via the corporate trust. The independent probate administrator had retrieved the remaining diamond tennis earrings and the platinum bracelets directly from the residential wall safe in Cherry Hill. I lifted the Cartier Art Deco necklace from its padded display tray. The massive, unheated blue sapphire caught the overhead fluorescent lighting, throwing a sharp, brilliant reflection across the quiet room. It was no longer a stolen asset weaponized to fund a golden child incompetence. It was no longer a pawn in a fraudulent insurance scheme designed to pad a corrupt retirement account. It was a tangible, undeniable symbol of my own absolute autonomy. I carefully returned the necklace to the lockbox and secured the latch. The diagnostic phase was complete. The demolition phase was finalized. I had successfully recovered my inheritance and neutralized the parasitic threat. However, possessing high-value vintage jewelry requires a secure, long-term strategy. I did not intend to wear the pieces to neighborhood gatherings or display them casually in my apartment. I needed to execute the final step of Sylvia's quiet clinical maneuver to ensure the boundary I had fought so hard to defend remained permanently intact. I picked up the heavy steel box and prepared to finalize the transition into my new normal. The logistical execution of managing high-value assets requires discipline. When you successfully recover a stolen inheritance, you do not immediately display the items on social media to gloat. You do not store a $60,000 Cartier Sapphire necklace in a generic residential wall safe. I placed a direct call to a specialized wealth management institution located in Lower Manhattan. I scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon to secure a climate-controlled safety deposit box within their subterranean maximum security vault. I transported the heavy steel lockbox across the Hudson River utilizing a bonded private courier service. The bank manager greeted me in a discreet, marble-lined lobby. He escorted me through dual biometric security checkpoints into the quiet, sterile environment of the vault. The air possessed a distinct, metallic coolness. I opened the lockbox and methodically transferred the diamond tennis earrings, the heavy platinum bracelets, and the centerpiece sapphire necklace into the designated steel drawer. I retained exactly one piece from Sylvia's collection. It was not the most financially significant item on the appraisal schedule. It was a subtle, elegant emerald ring set in a simple gold band. My grandmother wore it on her right hand every single day of my childhood. She wore it while she managed her own municipal bonds, and she wore it when she signed the irrevocable blind trust documents in her hospice room. I slid the emerald ring onto my own right ring finger. The gold felt cool against my skin. It serves as a quiet, permanent physical reminder of the boundary I successfully defended against the people who attempted to consume my future. I closed the steel drawer, and the bank manager locked the external vault door. The bulk of my inheritance was now entirely insulated from any future familial manipulation. The physical assets were protected by armed guards and reinforced concrete. The legal assets were shielded by an airtight corporate entity. My mother and my sister could no longer access my resources to fund their manufactured crises. The biological connection was formally severed. I initiated a comprehensive communication block across all digital platforms. I instructed Arthur Sterling, my probate litigator, to intercept any legal correspondence generated by Linda or her newly retained criminal defense counsel. I refused all requests for mediation or informal family meetings. I did not require an apology or a tearful reconciliation, because I recognized those gestures were simply tactical maneuvers designed to reopen a closed ledger. The subsequent months revealed the profound, brutal reality of their choices. Linda and Chloe no longer reside in the spacious suburban home in Cherry Hill. The crushing financial weight of the civil penalties levied by the national insurance carrier forced Linda into a rapid, distressed sale of the property. She liquidated the house well below market value to satisfy the massive investigative fees and the punitive fines generated by her fraudulent police report. She exhausted her primary retirement accounts to avoid federal prosecution. The comfortable, secure future she had envisioned evaporated instantly. They currently inhabit a cramped two-bedroom apartment located in a highly congested commercial district. They are navigating the grueling daily consequences of shattered credit scores and ruined professional reputations. Chloe Boutique Event Planning Agency in Hoboken is permanently shuttered. Her commercial landlord successfully executed the eviction, forcing her into formal Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Her vendors and suppliers seized her remaining inventory, and the public civil judgments attached to her name ensure she will not secure a new line of credit for at least a decade. They no longer possess the resources to maintain their fabricated reality. Linda cannot host lavish, catered Thanksgiving dinners to project an aura of generational wealth. Chloe cannot post curated images of crystal champagne flutes in vaulted ballrooms. The polished influencer facade dissolved completely when the funding source was finally cut off. They are living the exact life they earned through their own incompetence and their arrogant assumption that the rules did not apply to them. I return to my quiet, orderly apartment in Jersey City every evening. The space is sparsely furnished, but it is entirely mine. I do not dread the ringing of my mobile phone. I do not anxiously anticipate a manufactured crisis requiring my immediate financial intervention. I brew a cup of dark roast coffee, open my laptop, and review complex actuarial tables for my corporate clients. I enjoy the profound, unshakable peace that accompanies absolute financial autonomy. The dynamic of my childhood was built on a foundational lie. Linda trained me to believe that my role was to function as the invisible, reliable baseline, while Chloe consumed the spotlight and the resources. My mother repeatedly minimized my worth to elevate the golden child. She literally threw my achievements aside and told me I never liked pretty things anyway, to justify her blatant favoritism. She assumed I lacked the backbone to challenge her authority. She was catastrophically wrong. If you are currently sitting in a room where your family systematically minimizes your contributions to subsidize a favored sibling, I need you to listen very carefully. You are likely the competent one. You are the daughter who pays her own bills, manages her own career, and absorbs the unfair criticisms to maintain a fragile domestic peace. You have been conditioned to believe that defending your own boundaries is an act of selfishness. You have been trained to accept the scraps while they feast on the primary assets. You must stop trying to reason with them. People who steal from their own bloodline to fund a fabricated lifestyle do not respond to emotional appeals. They do not experience genuine remorse when confronted with the pain they cause. They merely view your tears as a temporary inconvenience. They will continue to drain your resources and manipulate the narrative until you actively sever the connection. You must treat your family dynamic like a hostile corporate takeover. Take the inventory. Audit the relationships in your life with the same ruthless clinical objectivity an actuary applies to a fraudulent ledger. Track the emotional and financial expenditures. Calculate exactly how much your silent compliance is costing your future. When you discover the massive discrepancy, do not ask for permission to protect yourself. Do not wait for a holiday dinner or an informal estate distribution to validate your existence. Execute the eviction yourself. Build your fortress of independence. Establish your legal trusts and secure your physical assets. Do not engage in screaming matches or public emotional warfare. Let them construct their precarious house of cards on the official record. And when the time comes, simply unclasps your briefcase. I sit at my desk in Jersey City, watching the evening traffic move silently along the street below my apartment window. The gold band of Sylvia's emerald ring rests securely on my right hand. The chaotic noise of my past, the frantic phone calls, the manufactured commercial crises, the endless demands for unearned bailouts, has been permanently muted. Dismantling my mother and sister's fraudulent reality was not an act of revenge. It was a necessary, overdue audit. Through the process of securing my stolen inheritance and watching their fictional empire collapse under the weight of its own perjury, I extracted 5 precise calculations about human behavior. First, compliance is not peace. When you quietly absorb the financial and emotional deficits of a toxic family, you are not keeping the peace. You are actively subsidizing their dysfunction. Second, biological relation does not override basic ethics or the rule of law. The word family is frequently weaponized by predators, utilized as a skeleton key to bypass boundaries they have no inherent right to cross. Third, strict financial autonomy combined with meticulous documentation creates an impenetrable fortress. When you control your own capital and hold the physical receipts, emotional gaslighting immediately loses its structural integrity. You cannot manipulate math. Fourth, you can never negotiate with individuals who view your personal stability as their emergency slush fund. You do not attempt to reason with a parasite. You simply sever its access to the host. Fifth, you must never accept the role of the invisible baseline just to protect a golden child's fragile ego. Your inherent worth is not determined by a mother who hands your legacy away, and you are never obligated to shrink your own footprint to make their illusions appear grander. I spent years watching my mother hand my sister the spotlight while I managed the logistics in the dark. I know many of you watching this currently occupy that exact same space. You are the reliable foundation holding up a crumbling, ungrateful family structure. You pay the invoices, swallow the insults, and hide your own success to keep them comfortable in their mediocrity. It is time to stop balancing their ledgers. It is time to initiate your own asset recovery. If this narrative provided you with the strategic clarity you needed today, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Maya Tells Stories. Share your own experiences in the comments section below. Tell me about the boundaries you are constructing and the receipts you are finally bringing into the light. We are a dedicated community of survivors, meticulous auditors, and relentless truth-tellers who refuse to fund the fiction any longer. Protect your hard-earned assets, trust the data, and let the undeniable